The morning sun painted the Denver airport terminal in shades of gold as Sarah Mitchell pulled her regulation carry-on through the bustling concourse. Her Navy flight attendant uniform was pristine, every button aligned perfectly, her hair pinned back in a neat bun. To the thousands of travelers rushing past her, parents dragging children, businessmen glued to their phones, elderly couples holding hands, she was invisible. Just another member of the cabin crew preparing for a routine cross-country flight. But Sarah knew the truth. She was anything but ordinary. 8 years ago, she'd been Captain Sarah Mitchell of the United States Air Force, stationed at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. She'd spent countless hours in the cockpit of an F-16 Fighting Falcon, pushing the aircraft to its absolute limits. The roar of the engines, the G-forces crushing her body as she executed perfect barrel rolls, the adrenaline surge of breaking the sound barrier. That had been her life. That had been her identity. She was one of the few women in her squadron, a distinction she'd earned through sheer determination and skill that rivaled any pilot in her unit. Her commanding officer, Colonel Richard Brennan, had once told her, "Mitchell, you're the best stick I've ever seen. You could fly anything, anywhere, anytime." Those words had meant everything to her then. She'd planned to make the Air Force her entire career, to retire as a senior officer after 20 or 30 years of service. But life had a way of rewriting your plans. Everything changed when her father suffered a massive heart attack. Sarah had been 3,000 miles away, mid-flight over the Atlantic, unable to reach him. By the time she'd returned to Denver, he was in intensive care, clinging to life by a thread. Her mother, alone and terrified, had whispered to Sarah in that sterile hospital room, "Your father doesn't have much time left. He wants to see you more. He wants his daughter back." For 6 weeks, Sarah had sat beside her father's hospital bed, watching the man who'd taught her to be brave slowly fade away. He recovered eventually, but something shifted in Sarah's perspective. The fighter pilot in her had spent 8 years training to protect her country from threats in the sky. But what about protecting the people she loved? What about being present for the moments that mattered? She'd made the difficult decision to leave the Air Force and take a civilian job that would keep her in Denver. Flying commercial aircraft as a pilot would have been the obvious choice, but those positions meant long absences, multi-day trips, overnight layovers, weeks away from family. Instead, she'd shocked everyone by applying to become a flight attendant for Rocky Mountain Airways. Her former commanding officer thought she was crazy. Her fellow pilots had been baffled. How could someone with her qualifications, her experience, her talent, want to serve drinks and demonstrate oxygen masks? But Sarah understood something they didn't. Every passenger who boarded an aircraft was someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's parent. They were trusting the airline with their safety, their time, their lives. She could protect them, not just in an emergency, but in every moment. And maybe, just maybe, she could be home for dinner 3 nights a week. 3 years had passed since she'd made that transition. She'd worked thousands of flights, served countless passengers, maintained perfect safety records. Her coworkers loved her professionalism. Her supervisors praised her leadership. Passengers frequently requested her specifically on future flights. She'd found a quiet satisfaction in this work that she hadn't expected. It was different from flying fighters, but it was meaningful in its own way. Yet Sarah never completely disconnected from her past. Every morning before her shifts, she did combat training exercises, push-ups, pull-ups, tactical breathing techniques. She maintained her pilot's license and flew a Cessna on weekends when she had time. She subscribed to military aviation journals and followed developments in defense technology. The fighter pilot in her was dormant, not dead. She'd simply learned to channel it in new directions. Today, as Sarah walked toward Gate 19 where Flight 447 waited, she felt the familiar pre-flight excitement. The aircraft, a Boeing 737, gleamed on the tarmac. She could see the ground crew making final preparations, checking fuel levels, loading baggage. She'd flown this route, Denver to San Francisco, at least 100 times. It was one of her favorites, just the right length to feel purposeful but short enough to be home by evening. She arrived at the gate 15 minutes early as always. Her two fellow flight attendants, Marcus and Jennifer, were already there going over the safety briefing materials. Both were experienced professionals, both excellent at their jobs. Marcus had been flying for 12 years, Jennifer for 7. They greeted Sarah warmly. "Hey Sarah, you got the good luck fairy today," Jennifer laughed. "Look at that passenger manifest. The flight's only 70% full. We'll have an easy day." Sarah smiled and nodded, but she was already studying the manifest, force of habit. She scanned passenger names, ages, special requests. Everything looked normal. 284 seats total with just 180 booked. Mostly business travelers, a few families, several elderly passengers. Nothing unusual. She walked to the jetway and watched as the early passengers began boarding. A businessman in an expensive suit, checking his watch anxiously. A woman with 2 young children, exhausted already and the flight hadn't even begun. An elderly couple holding hands. A teenager with oversized headphones. A man with a newspaper tucked under his arm, odd, Sarah thought, since most people read digitins now. As the boarding continued, Sarah took her position by the door, greeting each passenger with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard Flight 447. Can I help you find your seat?" Her voice was pleasant, professional, practiced through thousands of repetitions. She made brief eye contact with each person, cataloging faces, demeanor, anything unusual. That's when she noticed them. 3 men sitting separately but clearly together. They'd boarded at different times in different groups, but she'd recognized the subtle communication between them. A nod here, a glance there. The first man, stocky and muscular with a thick beard, had taken a seat in row 12. The second, lean and nervous, fidgeted in row 7. The third, older with graying temples, sat in row 23. They weren't making obvious eye contact now, but Sarah's combat training activated immediately. Her pulse remained steady, her breathing controlled, her expression unchanged. But her mind was running through possibilities like a tactical computer. The way the stocky man had positioned himself to see both exits. The way the nervous one kept touching his jacket. The way the older man's eyes had scanned the cockpit door. Sarah had spent 8 years reading threats in milliseconds. She'd been trained to recognize danger patterns that civilians would never notice. And right now, every instinct she possessed was screaming that something terrible was about to happen on Flight 447. She continued her boarding duties with perfect composure, but her mind was already calculating. If they were planning something, when would they make their move? After takeoff, certainly. Once the aircraft reached cruising altitude, she mentally walked through the emergency protocols, the location of the emergency equipment, the exits, the blind spots in the cabin where someone could position themselves unnoticed. As the last passengers boarded and the jetway was pulled back, Sarah took her seat for takeoff. Through the window, she could see the tarmac stretching beneath them, the runway beyond. Captain Harrison and the co-pilot had completed their pre-flight checks. The engines roared to life. Sarah closed her eyes for just a moment, taking a deep breath. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "You were born to protect people, sweetheart. Always remember that." The aircraft began to taxi toward the runway. Sarah opened her eyes and looked toward the 3 men scattered throughout the cabin, still maintaining their careful distance from each other. Whatever was coming, she was ready. Sarah's hands trembled as she locked herself in the rear galley lavatory, her mind racing faster than it ever had during a combat mission. The coded message she'd typed, "Combat-trained asset aboard. Flight 447, 3 armed subjects, cockpit compromised, standing by." Been sent through an encrypted military application she still maintained access to from her Air Force days. Now, in the suffocating darkness of the lavatory, she waited. Every second felt like an eternity. The aircraft had been hijacked approximately 4 minutes ago. Captain Harrison and the co-pilot were now prisoners in the cockpit, held at gunpoint by the stocky man she'd identified earlier. The nervous hijacker remained positioned near the cockpit door, a pistol gripped in his trembling hand. The older man was moving through the cabin, intimidating passengers into submission, his voice cold and authoritative as he barked orders in accented English. Sarah's phone vibrated silently against her hip. She pulled it out and unlocked the screen, her eyes scanning the encrypted message that had just arrived. It was from an unknown number, but the military authentication protocol that accompanied it was unmistakably legitimate. Her heart leaped. The message was short but loaded with meaning. Message received. Stand by for instructions. Do not engage unless lives in immediate danger. Maintain cover. Acknowledge. She typed back immediately. Understood. Asset ready. Will provide intel as available. Within seconds, another message appeared. 3 subjects confirmed from ground observations. Aircraft currently being tracked by military radar. FBI crisis negotiation team en route to nearest field office. Maintain secure channel. Do not attempt contact with crew unless absolutely necessary. Your survival is priority 1. Sarah took a deep breath, forcing her racing heart to slow. This was different from combat flying. In the air, she'd had instruments, controls, a clear mission objective. Here, she had limited information and even more limited options. She was 35,000 feet above the ground with 180 innocent people depending on her decisions. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her shoulders like G-forces in a fighter jet. A knock on the lavatory door made her jump. "Hello, is someone in there?" It was Jennifer's voice, tight with fear. Sarah flushed the toilet to create a realistic sound and opened the door, her expression carefully composed. Jennifer's eyes were red-rimmed, tears streaming down her face. Sarah pulled her into the lavatory and locked the door behind them. "What's happening?" Jennifer whispered frantically. "Who are these men? What do they want?" Sarah placed a finger to her lips, signaling silence. She leaned close to Jennifer's ear and spoke barely above a whisper. "Listen to me very carefully. Do exactly as I say. I need you to act normal out there. Comply with whatever they demand. Don't make eye contact. Don't be a hero. Do you understand?" Jennifer nodded, though her entire body was shaking. "I'm going to help us get through this," Sarah continued, her military training allowing her to project absolute confidence despite the chaos surrounding them. "But I need you to be my eyes and ears. Can you do that?" "What do you mean?" Jennifer asked, confusion mixing with her fear. "When you're serving passengers or moving through the cabin, I need you to notice things. How many of them have weapons? Where are they positioned? Do they seem organized or panicked? Can you do that without drawing attention to yourself?" Jennifer swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, I think so." "Good, now go back out there. Act scared, you are scared, which helps, but be helpful, be the flight attendant they expect to see. And Jennifer, if you see Marcus, tell him the same thing. We need to work together, but carefully." Sarah sent another encrypted message to her contact. 2 crew members now aware. They will provide additional eyes. Request real-time updates on negotiation progress. The response came quickly. Understood. Negotiation team establishing contact now. Hijackers demanding $10 million, safe passage to unidentified location and press coverage of their demands. Demands appear politically motivated. 3 subjects identified through facial recognition. Dmitry Volkov, age 47, Russian national with ties to militant organizations. Qasim al-Rashid, age 31, Syrian refugee with suspected terrorist connections. Viktor Petrov, age 26, Russian national with military background. All 3 considered dangerous and unpredictable. Sarah's blood ran cold as she read the information. These weren't amateur criminals or desperate individuals. They were professionals with military training and ideological motivation. That made them exponentially more dangerous. Desperate people sometimes made mistakes. Trained militants followed patterns, executed plans, and didn't hesitate to use violence. She waited exactly 7 minutes before leaving the lavatory, maintaining the appearance of someone who'd simply needed a private moment during the chaos. When she emerged, the cabin was eerily quiet. Passengers sat frozen in their seats, many crying silently, some staring straight ahead in shock. The older hijacker, Volkov, according to the intelligence, was packing near the windows, occasionally glancing at his watch. The nervous one, Al-Rashid, remained at his post near the cockpit door, his gun never wavering. Sarah moved slowly through the cabin, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She caught Marcus's eye and gave a subtle nod toward the rear galley. He understood. When Volkov turned away momentarily, Marcus slipped back to join her. "We need to stay alert and coordinated," Sarah told him quietly. "There are people on the ground who know what's happening. We're not alone." Marcus's eyes widened. "How do you never mind? What do you need me to do?" Sarah explained her plan in rapid whispers. Marcus would monitor the cockpit area, watching for any changes in the hijacker's behavior or positioning. Jennifer would observe the passengers and note if anyone became a liability, medical emergencies, aggressive behavior, panic that might escalate the situation. Sarah would coordinate information gathering and maintain contact with authorities. Over the next hour, Sarah sent a series of detailed messages to her military contact, each one providing crucial intelligence. Subject 1, Volkov, appears to be leader, makes final decisions, communicates through phone with unknown party on ground. Subject 2, Al-Rashid, is clearly subordinate, follows orders, appears nervous and unpredictable. Subject 3, Petrov, in cockpit with Captain Harrison and co-pilot, can hear raised voices occasionally but no gunshots. Approximately 180 passengers aboard. Most are compliant and frightened. No immediate medical emergencies reported. Aircraft currently in holding pattern over designated area. The response was immediate. FBI has established phone contact with Volkov. Negotiators attempting to build rapport and gather additional intelligence. Ground teams are coordinating with military assets. 2 fighter jets have been scrambled from nearby Air Force Base and are standing by. Primary objective: secure safe release of all passengers and crew. Secondary objective: apprehend subjects alive if possible. Your role: maintain security, prevent escalation, prepare for possible intervention if situation becomes critical. Are you armed? Sarah's fingers flew across the small phone screen. Negative. Flight attendant protocols prohibit weapons. However, I am combat trained and prepared to neutralize threats if necessary. Physical capabilities remain current. Request tactical authorization for defensive action if immediate threat to passenger lives emerges. The response took slightly longer this time, clearly indicating higher-level discussions happening on the ground. Authorization granted contingent upon clear and immediate threat to passenger safety. Lethal force authorized only as last resort. Non-lethal techniques preferred. You will receive notification if situation escalates to critical threshold. For now, maintain cover and continue intelligence gathering. Sarah slipped her phone back into her pocket and leaned against the galley wall, her mind processing everything. She'd left the Air Force to be closer to her family, to live a simpler life, to serve people rather than engage in combat. But fate had other plans. The woman she'd been 8 years ago, the fighter pilot, the warrior, the person trained to make split-second life-and-death decisions, was suddenly needed again. She looked out through the galley window at the endless sky stretching before them. Somewhere below, in command centers and crisis negotiation rooms, people were working frantically to resolve this situation without bloodshed. But up here, at 35,000 feet, in this metal tube filled with terrified human beings, Sarah Mitchell was the only shield between innocence and violence. The afternoon light was beginning to shift toward evening. The aircraft continued its endless circular pattern. The hijackers grew more agitated with each passing moment, and Sarah, dressed in her Navy flight attendant uniform, waited quietly for the moment when everything would change. She thought of her father, recovering at home, probably watching the news by now. She thought of her mother, praying in the hospital chapel where she'd spent so many agonizing hours years ago. She thought of all the passengers on this flight, each one someone's loved one, someone's reason to fight, someone's reason to survive. Her secure phone vibrated once more with a new message. Negotiators report subjects are becoming increasingly unstable, demands escalating, estimate critical point within 2 to 4 hours, prepare for possible intervention, stay alert. Sarah took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken since her last combat mission 8 years ago. Then she opened her eyes, smoothed her uniform, and stepped back into the cabin. Whatever came next, she was ready. 3 hours had passed. Flight 447 continued its monotonous circular pattern in the sky, like a metal vulture trapped in an endless spiral. The afternoon sun had shifted position, casting long shadows across the cabin. What had begun as a beautiful day in Colorado was becoming a nightmare that seemed to have no end in sight. Sarah checked her watch discreetly. 4:47 p.m. The flight had originally been scheduled to land at San Francisco International at 5:15 p.m. Instead, the aircraft was burning fuel at an alarming rate while going absolutely nowhere. The cabin temperature felt suffocating despite the air conditioning running at full capacity. The smell of fear hung in the recycled air like a physical presence. Several passengers had been crying for hours, their emotional reserves completely depleted. Others sat in stunned silence, staring at nothing, their minds unable to process the reality of their situation. In seat 12C, a middle-aged businessman had his head between his knees, hyperventilating softly. In row 8, an elderly woman clutched a rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer. The hijackers themselves were showing signs of significant stress. Dmitry Volkov, the leader, paced back and forth near the cockpit door with increasing agitation. His phone had been pressed to his ear for the past 20 minutes, his voice rising and falling as he argued with someone on the ground. Whatever was happening in the negotiations below wasn't going according to his plan. Sarah, positioned discreetly near the galley while organizing drink supplies she didn't need, listened carefully to the fragments of conversation that reached her ears. "I don't care what they said," Volkov shouted into the phone. His accent was thick, his English heavily accented but comprehensible. "We have leverage here, 180 innocent people. They will comply with our demands or people will die. You understand me?" There was silence as he listened to the response. His jaw clenched tighter with each passing second. "No more delays. You have until 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock, do you understand? If we don't have confirmation of the money transfer by then, we start executing passengers. 1 every 5 minutes until you comply. You have my word on that." He ended the call and threw his phone onto a nearby seat with such force that several passengers flinched. Sarah's stomach clenched. This was the critical escalation the FBI had warned about. The hijackers were moving from demands to deadlines. They were mentally preparing themselves for violence. Qasim al-Rashid, the nervous one guarding the cockpit, had begun sweating profusely. His gun hand trembled slightly as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Unlike Volkov, who seemed to draw energy from confrontation, al-Rashid appeared to be psychologically deteriorating. The reality of what they were attempting, what they might actually have to do, was clearly weighing on him. Sarah's secure phone buzzed silently. A message from her military contact. "Negotiators confirm subjects have issued execution deadline. 6 o'clock p.m. local time. Estimate 58 minutes remaining. FBI SWAT teams are being positioned. Fighter jets are on standby. Situation now considered critical. Assess passenger safety status and provide current hijacker positions immediately." Sarah quickly typed back while appearing to stalk the galley. Volkov in cabin near cockpit, increasingly agitated and violent. Al-Rashid at cockpit door, nervous, unstable. Petrov still in cockpit with flight crew. Passengers becoming desperate. Multiple individuals showing signs of psychological breakdown. One passenger hyperventilating, approaching medical emergency. Recommend intervention preparation. Time sensitive. The response came almost immediately. Understood. Medical emergency noted. Authorize you to provide medical assistance to passenger if needed. This may provide opportunity to move through cabin and assess additional factors. Proceed carefully. Do not expose yourself to unnecessary risk. Sarah set down her clipboard and moved directly toward the hyperventilating businessman in 12. See, her expression was calm, professional, exactly what a flight attendant should be in a moment of crisis. She knelt beside him, her voice soft and reassuring. Sir, I'm Sarah. I'm going to help you, okay? I need you to focus on your breathing. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Can you do that with me? The man's eyes were wide with panic, but he nodded. Sarah placed a gentle hand on his back and began walking him through controlled breathing exercises. Around them, other passengers watched with a mixture of hope and desperation. If anyone could help them, maybe she could. From his position near the cockpit, Volkov watched Sarah work with the distressed passenger. For a moment, his hardened expression softened almost imperceptibly. Perhaps even a man committed to violence recognized human compassion when he witnessed it. After nearly 5 minutes, the businessman's breathing had stabilized. Color was returning to his face. Sarah squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. You're going to be okay, she whispered. Just stay calm and stay seated. As she stood to move away, Volkov approached her. His gun was holstered but clearly within reach. Sarah's pulse accelerated, but she kept her expression neutral, almost submissive. You, he said, pointing at her, flight attendant, you are very calm. Most people are screaming, crying, but you. He studied her face carefully as if trying to read her soul. You are different. Sarah's mind raced. This was incredibly dangerous. If he suspected that she was more than she appeared, if he realized she had military training, he might perceive her as a threat. She needed to deflect his attention immediately. I've been flying for a long time, she said quietly, keeping her eyes slightly downcast in a gesture of submission. I've learned that panicking doesn't help anyone. These people need someone to be calm, someone to show them that someone cares. She paused, then added, and your men need someone to help maintain order. It's easier for them if passengers aren't becoming medical emergencies. Volkov studied her for another long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. You are smart. Yes, order is better for everyone. He gestured toward the galley. You continue helping people. Keep them calm. That is good. Sarah nodded respectfully and returned to the galley, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. That had been too close. One wrong move, one subtle hint of her true capabilities, and the entire situation could have deteriorated into violence. Marcus appeared beside her moments later, ostensibly to help with drink supplies. That was incredible, he whispered urgently. He was staring at you like he was trying to figure something out. He suspects nothing, Sarah replied quietly, though her hands were still shaking slightly as she arranged cups. He was just human for a moment. That's actually more dangerous, not less. When people remember they're human, they become unpredictable. Her phone vibrated again. Another message. 43 minutes until deadline. Ground teams moving into position. 3 helicopter teams are en route. Exercise extreme caution. Situation deteriorating rapidly. Volkov has just threatened to execute 1 passenger immediately as a demonstration of seriousness. How many passengers can you get to safety if evacuation becomes necessary? Sarah looked out at the cabin. 180 people, most of them terrified, confused, physically and emotionally exhausted. They'd been trapped in this metal tube for hours. If an emergency evacuation became necessary at 35,000 feet, it would be a catastrophe. But she understood what the message meant. The authorities were preparing for a worst-case scenario. She typed back, negative on mass evacuation. Aircraft altitude too high. Emergency descent only option, but that requires pilot control. If cockpit crew disabled, descent becomes uncontrolled. Recommend tactical intervention to retake cockpit before evacuation becomes necessary. I can assist." The response was brief but loaded with meaning. "Understood. Preparing for possible tactical intervention. Stand by." Sarah set down her phone and looked at Marcus. "How much longer can you stay calm?" she asked. Marcus's face went pale. "Why, what's about to happen?" "Everything," Sarah said simply. "In the next 40 minutes, everything is going to change." She turned to look at the cabin, at the frightened faces, the desperate eyes, the people who'd trusted her with their safety by boarding this aircraft. She thought of her father, her mother, all the people waiting at home wondering if she was still alive. Sarah took a deep breath, rolled her shoulders, and began mentally preparing herself for what was coming. The fighter pilot inside her was waking up, and this time there was nowhere to run. 38 minutes remained until Volkov's deadline. The cabin had descended into a hellscape of desperation and fear. Several passengers were now openly sobbing. A young mother in row 14 held her 5-year-old daughter against her chest, whispering prayers and promises of a tomorrow they might never see. An elderly man in row 3 had suffered a minor heart episode 40 minutes ago, nothing life-threatening, but enough to terrify him further. Sarah had monitored his vitals discreetly, knowing that another medical crisis could be the trigger that pushed Volkov over the edge from threats into action. Qasim al-Rashid's psychological deterioration had accelerated dramatically. The nervous hijacker was no longer attempting to maintain composure. His breathing came in ragged gasps. Sweat soaked through his shirt. His gun hand trembled so violently that Sarah worried the weapon might discharge accidentally. These were the signs of someone whose mind was fracturing under the weight of what he was being forced to contemplate. Viktor Petrov, the third hijacker still locked in the cockpit with Captain Harrison and the co-pilot, had gone completely silent. No shouting, no audible threats, nothing. The silence was somehow worse than the violence. Sarah imagined him in that confined space, gun pressed against someone's head, hours stretching into an eternity of psychological torture. Volkov continued packing like a caged animal. His phone had been silenced, but Sarah could see him checking messages every few seconds, his expression growing darker with each notification. The negotiations on the ground were clearly not progressing in his favor. The authorities had probably been playing for time, stalling, trying to de-escalate. But Volkov wasn't the type of man who could be talked down. He'd committed fully to this course of action. There was no walking back now. Sarah's secure phone had been buzzing with increasing frequency. The messages were becoming more urgent. 32 minutes to deadline. Volkov has instructed al-Rashid to select a passenger for execution. This is a critical moment. If he follows through, the situation becomes irreversible. Be prepared for immediate intervention. 28 minutes. Ground teams report al-Rashid is approaching passenger in row 5. Appears to be preparing for violence. Your authorization for tactical action is now activated. Wait for final green light from command. Stand by. Volkov just commanded al-Rashid to execute a passenger to demonstrate seriousness. Intervention is imminent. Prepare yourself. When we give the signal, you will have approximately 90 seconds to neutralize threats and secure the cabin. Are you ready? Sarah typed with steady fingers despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Affirmative. Combat ready. Standing by for signal. She set the phone aside and closed her eyes for just a moment. 8 years. It had been 8 years since she'd been in actual combat. 8 years since she'd moved through the world as a warrior rather than a caregiver. Her body remembered, though. Muscle memory was real and powerful. The training never truly left you. It simply waited dormant for the moment when it was needed again. The man in row 5 was Thomas Chen, a 53-year-old accountant traveling to San Francisco for a business meeting that would now never happen. He sat rigidly in his seat, resigned to his fate. His wife was probably watching the news coverage right now. His children were probably terrified. He was thinking of them, Sarah was certain. Everyone thought of their loved ones in moments like this. Al-Rashid moved toward Thomas with his gun raised. His lips were moving, though no words came out. He was trying to work himself up to something he fundamentally didn't want to do. That hesitation was crucial. It was the moment when humanity still had a chance. "Stop!" Sarah heard herself shout. Every head in the cabin turned toward her. Volkov's hand immediately went to his weapon. Al-Rashid's gun pivoted toward her, but Sarah was already moving, her body operating on pure instinct and 8 years of combat training. "He needs help," Sarah called out, gesturing urgently toward a different passenger, the elderly man who'd had the heart episode earlier. "His condition is critical. He needs medical attention immediately, or he'll die right here in your aircraft." It was a calculated gamble. She was banking on the fact that mass execution in front of a dying man would complicate Volkov's narrative, would make this less about political statement and more about criminal brutality. She was betting that even a hardened militant would understand the optics of letting a defenseless old man die on camera for the news helicopters. For a moment no one moved, then Volkov lowered his weapon slightly. "Attend to him," he commanded, his voice cold. "If he dies, it is not our responsibility." Sarah moved toward the elderly passenger with purpose, using the movement as cover to calculate distances and positioning. Al-Rashid was now 10 feet away from Thomas Chen, his attention momentarily diverted. Volkov was near the cockpit door, about 15 feet away. The civilians were scattered throughout the cabin in unpredictable positions. This was going to be impossibly difficult. She checked the elderly man's pulse, steady, strong. He wasn't actually dying, but she needed to buy time to create a situation where the hijackers would be focused on something other than executing passengers. She began administering oxygen from the emergency medical kit, speaking calmly to the old man in a low voice. "Just breathe slowly. Help is coming. We're going to get through this." The man's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," he whispered. Her phone vibrated silently. A message with just 3 words: "Green light, go now." Sarah's heart stopped for a single beat. Then everything shifted. The civilian part of her consciousness, the flight attendant, the woman who'd spent 3 years learning to prioritize safety and compassion, stepped aside. The fighter pilot took over. She stood smoothly, her mind processing the environment in milliseconds. Volkov was 15 feet away, near the cockpit. Al-Rashid was 12 feet away, his attention partially divided. 45 passengers within direct line of sight. Multiple overhead bins that could be dangerous if contents fell during physical altercation. Sarah positioned herself strategically between the hijackers and the densest cluster of passengers. Then she spoke directly to Al-Rashid, her voice steady and authoritative. "The man you were going to shoot is having a medical emergency. He needs to be moved to the galley where I can monitor his vitals. I'm coming to help you move him." It was a command disguised as a request. Al-Rashid, psychologically fractured and desperate for someone to tell him what to do, nodded numbly. He lowered his gun slightly. That was her opening. Everything Sarah had trained for, everything her body had been conditioned to do, erupted forth in controlled violence. She closed the distance between herself and Al-Rashid in 1.3 seconds, a span of time that would change everything. Her hand came up in a precise arc, striking the pressure point on his wrist with exactly enough force to make his fingers spasm open. The gun fell. She pivoted, using Al-Rashid's own momentum against him, and drove him toward the floor with a controlled takedown technique that rendered him temporarily immobilized. She didn't break anything. She didn't need to. She just needed to make him incapable of resistance. Other passengers, emboldened by her sudden action, surged forward. A large businessman grabbed Al-Rashid's fallen weapon and aimed it at Volkov with shaking hands. "Don't move," the businessman shouted. Volkov's hand flew toward his own pistol, but Sarah was already moving again. 8 years of muscle memory, 8 years of training. 8 years of being the best stick in her squadron finally revealed themselves in this moment. Everything exploded into controlled chaos. Everything crystallized into a moment of pure, crystalline violence. Volkov's hand had barely moved toward his holster when Sarah pivoted sharply, her left leg extending in a perfectly executed sweep that would have made her Air Force instructors proud. Years of hand-to-hand combat training compressed into a single, devastating motion. Volkov's feet left the ground. His body flew backward with an audible grunt as the air exploded from his lungs. He crashed into the armrest of a seat in row 3, the impact hard enough to stun him momentarily. Sarah didn't hesitate. She moved toward him with the predatory grace of someone who'd spent thousands of hours perfecting the art of controlled violence. Before Volkov could recover, she was on him, her hand finding the pressure point on his inner wrist where a nerve cluster made the fingers spasm involuntarily. His gun clattered to the floor. The cabin erupted. Passengers who'd spent 3 hours in frozen terror suddenly exploded into motion. The large businessman who'd grabbed al-Rashid's fallen weapon, his name was David Patterson, though Sarah would never know that, stepped forward with the gun trained on Volkov. His hands were shaking so badly the barrel wobbled, but his intent was clear. "Don't you fucking move," Patterson screamed, his voice cracking with rage and adrenaline. "You son of a bitch, you threatened my daughter." Marcus appeared at Sarah's side, his mild-mannered flight attendant persona completely shed. "The cockpit," he shouted. "We still have one more." Sarah's mind was already there. Viktor Petrov, the third hijacker, the one with military training locked in a confined space with Captain Harrison and the co-pilot. That situation had to be resolved immediately, or everything they'd just accomplished would unravel. She sprinted toward the cockpit door, her mind running calculations. Petrov would have heard the commotion. He would be on high alert, potentially preparing to execute his captives or barricade himself inside. The cockpit door had been reinforced after 9/11, designed to withstand significant force. She couldn't simply crash through it. "Petrov," she shouted, pounding on the door. "This is the flight crew. Open this door now or we're forcing it open." The speaker crackled with static. Then a voice, Russian-accented, controlled, dangerous. "I will execute both pilots if you attempt entry." Sarah's eyes narrowed. She made a split-second decision. She pressed her face close to the small window in the cockpit door and made eye contact with Captain Harrison. The captain's face was pale with terror, a gun pressed against his temple by Petrov, but his eyes were alert. He understood. "Captain Harrison," Sarah said clearly, speaking loudly enough that Petrov could hear her through the reinforced door. "I need you to tell me what happened to Flight 175. Confusion flickered across the captain's face, but he was a pilot trained in crisis response. He understood immediately. She was establishing communication, creating dialogue, buying time while doing something else. Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower on September 11th, Captain Harrison said, his voice steady despite the gun pressed to his head. "It was hijacked by terrorists who forced the pilots to surrender control. The difference between then and now is that we're not surrendering. We're not giving up." "Exactly," Sarah said. In that moment she moved. Not toward the door, but toward the galley where Marcus was restraining the now conscious but groaning al-Rashid. She grabbed the emergency axe, a tool every commercial aircraft carried for exactly this kind of emergency. The blade was designed to cut through materials, not primarily to be a weapon, but it could serve that purpose if needed. She returned to the cockpit door and began methodically striking the lock mechanism. The reinforced door was tough, but it wasn't indestructible. 3 strikes, 4, 5. "Stop," Petrov screamed from inside. "I will kill them." "You're going to do that anyway," Sarah called back, not pausing her strikes. "Because that's what trained soldiers do when they've been cornered. You've already lost. The only question is whether you die as a killer or whether you surrender and live to see trial." 6 strikes. The lock mechanism was beginning to fail. Inside the cockpit, Petrov was experiencing the cognitive collapse that comes with losing control of a situation. He'd been trained to anticipate scenarios, to maintain dominance, to execute plans. But nothing in his training had prepared him for a flight attendant with Air Force combat experience. Nothing had prepared him for a situation where his threats were being casually disregarded by someone who understood exactly what he was capable of. The co-pilot, a 61-year-old veteran named Robert Chen, made a calculated decision. In the split second when Petrov's attention was partially divided between the door and the cockpit window, Robert moved. It wasn't a skilled martial arts movement. Robert had never been trained in combat. It was pure survival instinct. He threw his elbow backward into Petrov's ribs with all the strength he could muster. Petrov grunted, staggered, his gun hand wavering. Captain Harrison took his opportunity. He grabbed Petrov's wrist, twisting sharply while driving his knee upward. The gun flew free, clattering against the control panel. At precisely that moment, Sarah's 7th strike finally shattered the lock mechanism. The cockpit door swung open. What she saw was controlled chaos. Captain Harrison had Petrov in a chokehold, not lethal, but enough to incapacitate. Robert was retrieving the fallen gun, and in the captain's seat, the autopilot continued its steady work, keeping Flight 447 stable at 35,000 feet even as the world inside it collapsed. Sarah moved into the cockpit and secured Petrov with cable ties from the emergency kit, binding his wrists and ankles with efficient, practiced motions. She worked quickly but carefully, professional despite her racing heart. "Is everyone hurt?" she asked Captain Harrison. "No, we're okay. Thanks to you," Harrison gasped, breathing heavily as he collapsed into a seat. Sarah turned to the co-pilot. "Robert, are you injured?" "Just bruised," Chen replied, still gripping the gun he'd retrieved. "I think I broke one of my ribs, but I can still fly." "You're not flying anywhere," Sarah said gently. She took the gun from him and secured it in the emergency equipment locker. "We need you to focus on breathing and staying calm. I need to get back to the cabin." She moved back toward the main cabin, where the situation had stabilized considerably. Volkov was on the floor with multiple passengers restraining him. A middle-aged woman was sitting on his legs, while 2 businessmen had control of his arms. Al-Rashid remained zip-tied and unconscious from hitting his head during the initial takedown. David Patterson still held the confiscated gun, though his hands had stopped shaking. Jennifer was moving through the cabin, checking on passengers, offering water, providing reassurance. Marcus had established a makeshift medical station in the galley, treating minor injuries. Sarah's secure phone was vibrating almost continuously. She glanced at the screen to see dozens of messages from her military contact. Situation neutralized. Status report immediately. All 3 subjects secured. Aircraft still stable. Passengers safe. She typed a single response. All 3 hijackers neutralized and secured. 0 fatalities. 1 possible broken rib on crew member. 1 elderly passenger with minor cardiac event. Multiple passengers in psychological shock but physically unharmed. Aircraft stable. We are descending to nearest airport. Authorities can take custody of subjects upon landing. Flight 447 is secure. The response came almost instantaneously. Outstanding. Medical teams are standing by at landing location. Fighter jets will maintain escort. You have saved 180 lives today. Your service to this country is not forgotten. Sarah set down her phone and looked around the cabin, at the frightened faces that were slowly beginning to believe they would survive this, at the people who'd watched her fight and had found their own courage in that moment, at the miracle of human resilience. She'd left the Air Force to save people in a different way. Today, she'd done both. Captain Harrison's hands trembled as he took control of the aircraft from the autopilot. For the past 3 hours, The Boeing 737 had been piloted by automated systems, while a madman held a gun to his head. Now, with the hijackers secured and the immediate threat neutralized, the captain faced a new challenge: bringing a damaged aircraft safely to the ground while his body was flooded with adrenaline and his mind reeled from the trauma of what he'd just experienced. "Denver approach, this is Flight 447, Harrison said, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil churning inside him. "We have regained control of the aircraft. All subjects are secured. We are requesting immediate clearance for emergency descent and landing at Denver International." The response came back almost instantaneously, the controller's voice tight with urgency. "Flight 447, this is Denver approach. We have you on radar. Stand by for immediate descent clearance. All emergency equipment is being mobilized. Say your status." "We have 3 armed subjects in custody. 1 crew member with possible broken rib, 1 passenger with cardiac event stabilized, multiple passengers in psychological distress. Aircraft systems are nominal. Fuel status is critical. We have approximately 45 minutes of endurance at current altitude." "Understood, Flight 447. You are cleared for immediate descent. Begin descent to 10,000 feet at maximum safe rate. Emergency landing vehicles are being positioned. All available medical personnel are standing by." The aircraft banked sharply as Captain Harrison disengaged the autopilot and began the emergency descent. The G-forces pushed passengers back into their seats. Many screamed, terrified that another crisis was unfolding. Sarah immediately moved through the cabin, her presence somehow creating an island of calm in the chaos. "It's okay," she called out, her voice carrying effortlessly over the noise. "Captain Harrison is bringing us down safely. We're going to make it. Everyone just hold tight and breathe." Her confidence was infectious. Passengers who'd been on the edge of panic began to settle. The woman holding her 5-year-old daughter squeezed her child tighter but managed a weak smile. The businessman who'd grabbed the hijacker's gun nodded at Sarah with gratitude in his eyes. Through the cabin windows, Sarah could see the landscape rushing up toward them. The Rocky Mountains spread out below like a rumpled blanket, their peaks glowing in the late afternoon sun. Behind them, 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons, ironically, the same aircraft model she'd once piloted, maintained formation on either side of the 737. The military escort sent a powerful message. This aircraft was under the protection of the United States Armed Forces. Jennifer appeared at Sarah's side, her professional composure still intact despite the ordeal. "What happened in the cockpit?" she whispered urgently. "Captain Harrison and the co-pilot overcame the 3rd hijacker," Sarah explained quietly. "He's secured now. Everyone's going to be okay." The descent was aggressive but controlled. Captain Harrison pushed the aircraft to its limits, descending at a rate that would make most passengers uncomfortable on a normal flight but was necessary under these circumstances. The cabin pressure fluctuated, ears popped, and several passengers felt mild nausea. But no one complained. They all understood what was happening. They were going home. Sarah checked on the elderly man with the heart condition. His vitals had stabilized. His color was returning. He was alert and aware, though clearly shaken. "You saved my life," he said, gripping her hand firmly. "I saved a lot of people's lives today," Sarah replied gently. "But you're going to be okay. Help is waiting for you on the ground." The aircraft leveled off at 5,000 feet. Denver International Airport was visible on the horizon, its distinctive peaked roof gleaming in the afternoon light. From the ground, emergency vehicles were already racing toward the designated landing area. Fire trucks, ambulances, police vehicles, FBI units, an entire armada of emergency response teams mobilized and ready. Through the cockpit window, Sarah could see news helicopters beginning to circle at a distance, their cameras recording everything. The story was already spreading. By the time Flight 447 touched down, millions of people would be watching. Flight 447, you are cleared for final approach, the tower controller announced. Emergency equipment is standing by. Welcome home. Captain Harrison guided the aircraft down with the precision of a consummate professional. Despite the trauma, despite the adrenaline still coursing through his veins, his hands were steady on the yoke. He'd trained for emergencies his entire career. This was the moment all that training had prepared him for. The landing gear extended with a mechanical whine. The flaps descended. The aircraft slowed as it aligned with the runway, 2,000 feet above the ground, 1,500. The wheels touched down with a gentle bump. The reverse thrusters roared to life, slowing the massive aircraft. The runway stretched before them, lined on both sides with emergency vehicles, their lights flashing in coordinated patterns of red and blue. The moment the aircraft came to a complete stop, Sarah's secure phone exploded with notifications. Dozens of messages, each one more urgent than the last. Aircraft landed safely, all personnel accounted for, 3 subjects in custody, 0 fatalities, excellent work. Media teams are already gathering. Prepare for debriefing. FBI will take custody of subjects immediately. You are to remain with the aircraft until federal agents arrive. Do not speak to media or passengers about the events. This is classified military operation. Your heroism will be honored. Stand by for further instructions. Captain Harrison opened the cabin address system. His voice broadcast throughout the aircraft. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of myself and the entire crew, welcome to Denver. I want you to know that everyone aboard this aircraft acted with incredible courage today. We survived because we worked together. Federal agents are now boarding the aircraft to take custody of the individuals who attempted to take control. Please remain in your seats until you are instructed to exit. Medical personnel will be available to assist anyone who needs immediate care. The cockpit door opened, and agents in tactical gear streamed aboard. They moved with professional efficiency, securing Volkov and Al-Rashid with new restraints and removing them from the aircraft first. Petrov followed moments later, his Russian face hard and expressionless. As the hijackers were led away, something remarkable happened. The passengers began to clap, slowly at first, then building into a crescendo of sound that filled the cabin. It wasn't directed at the federal agents or the pilots, though both deserved recognition. The applause was directed at Sarah. She stood in the galley, her Navy flight attendant uniform still perfectly pressed despite everything, and felt tears slide down her cheeks for the first time since the crisis began. 8 years ago, she'd walked away from a career as a fighter pilot. Today, she'd proven that the skills she'd developed never truly left you. They waited, patient and dormant, for the moment when they were needed most. Marcus put his arm around her shoulders. Jennifer reached for her hand. Captain Harrison emerged from the cockpit and nodded at her with profound respect. As the passengers began deplaning, they each paused beside Sarah to thank her, to touch her shoulder, to acknowledge the woman who'd saved their lives. Some were crying. Some were smiling. All of them would remember this day for the rest of their lives. Through the windows, Sarah could see news vans pulling up to the airport perimeter. Cameras were being set up. Reporters were preparing their stories. By tonight, everyone in America would know her name. Her secret would be exposed. Her quiet life as a flight attendant would be transformed forever. She looked at the runway stretching out before her, at the mountains in the distance painted gold by the setting sun, and took a deep breath. Whatever came next, whatever questions would be asked and stories told, she'd done the right thing. She'd protected the people in her care. She'd honored her oath. She'd finally answered the question her father had asked years ago. What would she do when the moment came to truly make a difference? She'd been ready. The airport had become a media circus by the time federal agents finished their preliminary interviews with passengers and crew. News helicopters circled overhead like vultures, their cameras capturing every detail for the evening broadcasts. By 6:47 p.m., less than 90 minutes after Flight 447 had touched down safely, the story had exploded across every major news network in America. What had begun as a localized crisis in the Denver air traffic control system had metamorphosed into a national phenomenon. Sarah sat in a private conference room at Denver International Airport, flanked by two FBI agents. One, Special Agent Marcus Rodriguez, was reviewing her statement with meticulous attention to detail. The other, Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, was recording everything for the official record. They'd been interviewing her for 45 minutes, asking increasingly specific questions about her combat training, her Air Force background, her decision to become a flight attendant. "Let me get this straight," Rodriguez said, reviewing his notes. "You were a fighter pilot with the U.S. Air Force for 8 years. You flew F-16 Combat Falcons. You were stationed at Luke Air Force Base in Arizona. You left active duty approximately 3 years ago. And you've been working as a commercial airline flight attendant for those 3 years without disclosing your military background to your employer." "That's correct," Sarah confirmed calmly. "There's nothing in the application process that requires disclosure of previous military service. I was truthful about my credentials and my ability to perform the job. My background didn't seem relevant to serving drinks and demonstrating oxygen masks." Walsh leaned forward slightly. "But you maintained contact with military encryption protocols. You still had access to secure military communications networks. That suggests you never truly separated from the Defense Department." "I took early retirement at their suggestion," Sarah explained. "They offered me a consulting arrangement. I maintain security clearance and have access to certain military systems in case my expertise is needed. I've never used those systems for personal reasons until today." Rodriguez set down his pen and studied Sarah carefully. "You understand that what you did today will be classified as an act of heroism. You prevented a potential terrorist attack. You saved 180 lives. There's no way this remains private. The media is already outside these doors demanding information." "I understand," Sarah said quietly. "We're recommending a full commendation from the Department of Defense," Walsh added. "This will likely result in a congressional hearing. You'll probably be called to testify about the hijacking. Your name will be public. Your story will be everywhere." Sarah nodded, accepting this reality. She'd known the moment she moved that the life she'd carefully constructed would shatter. There was no going back now. The fighter pilot had been exposed. The secret was revealed. 2 hours later, she was released from the interview room with a federal escort. The moment the conference room door opened, a tsunami of media descended. Reporters shouted questions from every direction. Camera flashes created a blinding white light. Security personnel formed a protective cordon around her as she walked toward the exit. Sarah Mitchell, can you tell us what happened on Flight 447? Were you really a fighter pilot? Did you have military training before the hijacking? How many hijackers were there? Did anyone die? Are you a hero?" Sarah didn't answer any of the questions. She simply kept walking, her jaw set, her eyes forward. She'd learned long ago that feeding the media beast only created more hunger. Better to let the story develop through official channels. By 10 p.m., every news network was running her photograph. Former Captain Sarah Mitchell, fighter pilot turned flight attendant. The internet had exploded with her story. Twitter was flooded with Sarah Mitchell trending worldwide. Conspiracy theorists were already spinning elaborate narratives about military cover-ups and false flag operations. But mostly, people were simply amazed. A woman with special operations training had been hiding in plain sight, serving passengers cocktails while maintaining the ability to neutralize armed hijackers. Her mother had seen the news first. By the time Sarah's rental car pulled up to her parents' house in suburban Denver, her mother was waiting on the front porch, tears streaming down her face. She pulled Sarah into an embrace so tight it nearly cut off her breathing. "I was so scared," her mother whispered. "When I saw the news about the hijacking and then they said it was your flight, She couldn't finish the sentence, just held Sarah tighter. Sarah's father emerged from the house, moving slowly due to the lingering weakness from his heart attack. But his eyes were bright with pride and love. He took Sarah's face in his weathered hands and kissed her forehead. "You did good, sweetheart," he said simply. "You did exactly what you were born to do." Over the next week, Sarah became the most famous flight attendant in American history. She gave carefully managed interviews to select media outlets. She appeared on morning news shows. She was invited to speak at universities and military academies. The airline promoted her immediately, not because they needed to, but because refusing to would have been commercial suicide. Rocky Mountain Airways milked the publicity shamelessly, using Sarah's heroism in advertising campaigns. But more importantly, Sarah received letters, thousands of them, from passengers on Flight 447 and their families, from military veterans who recognized the sacrifice she'd made by leaving the Air Force, from young women inspired by her story, women who wanted to become pilots, soldiers, and protectors themselves, from the families of first responders thanking her for understanding what it meant to run toward danger to protect strangers. One letter stood out. It was from Thomas Chen, the passenger she'd prevented from being executed. He'd written, "Dear Captain Mitchell, I will never forget the moment you shouted my name and drew attention away from me. In that single moment, you taught me something profound about human courage. I was resigned to my death. I'd accepted it, but you refused to accept it on my behalf. You fought for my life as if it mattered more than your own. Because of you, I'm here to watch my daughter graduate from college next month. Because of you, my wife still has a husband. Because of you, the world continues. Thank you doesn't seem adequate, but I offer it anyway with every fiber of my being." 2 months after the hijacking, Sarah received a formal invitation to the White House. She was to be awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, one of the nation's highest civilian honors. She arrived in Washington, D.C., wearing a formal dress instead of her flight attendant uniform, and stood in the Oval Office shaking hands with the president. "Your service to this nation is extraordinary," the president said, placing the medal around her neck. "You represent the best of America, the courage, the selflessness, the willingness to put others before yourself." But the moment that truly changed Sarah came when she returned to Flight 447 3 weeks after the hijacking. Rocky Mountain Airways had completely refurbished the aircraft. They'd made it symbolically clean, erasing any physical reminder of the violence thought had unfolded inside. Sarah arrived for her shift in her Navy uniform, looking exactly as she had before the crisis, but everything was different now. As she walked onto the aircraft, every passenger recognized her. They greeted her not as a flight attendant, but as a hero. An elderly woman pressed a hand to her chest. A businessman stood up to shake her hand. A child asked for her autograph. And Sarah understood something profound in that moment. Her father had asked her years ago what she would do when the moment came to make a real difference. She'd thought it meant dramatic action, shooting down enemy aircraft, executing complex military missions. But the real difference was in the everyday moments, in serving people, in being present, in protecting the vulnerable. She'd left the Air Force to be a flight attendant. Today, she realized that wasn't a downgrade. It was a calling. Flying combat missions had prepared her for this moment, yes, but her true strength lay in something deeper. It lay in her commitment to the people around her, not as an abstract duty, but as a personal, intimate responsibility. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate and began taxiing toward the runway, Sarah stood in the galley, making eye contact with each passenger who'd boarded. Some recognized her, others didn't, but all of them were in her care. All of them were trusting her with their safety. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 447, she said into the cabin address system, her voice steady and warm. "We're glad to have you with us today. On behalf of the entire flight crew, we want you to know that your safety is our highest priority. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight." She'd returned to where she belonged, not because the world had forced her there, but because she'd finally understood that this was where her true heroism lay. Not in the headlines or the medals or the congressional hearings, but in the quiet, steady commitment to protecting the people in her care, one flight at a time. As the aircraft lifted off from Denver, climbing toward the endless sky, Sarah Mitchell smiled. She was exactly where she needed to be. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.